Only 4 light years. That is what we say about the nearest star to our own, the way you might say a shop is only 4 streets away, as if it were a short walk you could take if you ever found the time for it. Tonight, I want to slow that small word down, because hidden inside it is a distance so long that light itself, the fastest thing that exists, needs a full year just to cross it. We are going to take the smallest marking on the entire map of the stars, one single light year, and measure it honestly against everything we have ever built, against our fastest machine, against the farthest probe we have ever flown, against engines that would need the energy of thousands of bombs just to move one small craft. And by the end of tonight, you will know exactly how long it truly takes to cross that single small tick of the ruler, and why the real answer is so much worse than you think. Get comfortable. If you are the kind of person who quietly loves having your sense of scale taken apart and put back together, hitting like and subscribing genuinely helps this channel reach more people who think the way you do. Because by the end of this, that little word, only, is never going to sound the same to you again. Now let's slowly settle in. There is a phrase you have heard so many times that it has stopped meaning anything. The nearest star, people say, is only 4 light years away. You have read it in headlines, heard it in documentaries, maybe said it yourself, and every time that small word slips by unnoticed. Only 4 light years. We say it the way we might say a town is only 4 miles down the road, as if it were a short trip, a weekend drive, something a determined person could simply set out and do. Tonight, I want to slow that phrase down until it stops being comfortable, because hidden inside that casual little word is one of the largest and strangest facts about our situation in the universe, and almost no one ever stops to look at it directly. Here is the question I want to leave sitting in the room with us, the one this whole night is built around. How long does it actually take to travel a single light year? Not 4 of them. Not the whole distance to another star. Just one. One tick on the ruler we use to measure the cosmos. It sounds like it should have a simple, almost boring answer, the kind of thing you could look up and forget. But the honest answer is so far outside what our intuition expects that it changes the way you see every night sky you will ever stand under. By the time we are done, you will know exactly what that 1 light year costs, in years, and in energy, and in something harder to name. And I think you will agree that the true answer is worse, and stranger, than you think. Let me start with the gentlest version of the problem, the one that hides in plain sight. A light year is a unit of distance. That is the first thing almost everyone gets slightly wrong, because the word ends in year, and years are time. So some quiet part of the mind files a light year away as a duration, a length of waiting, a stretch of calendar you could endure if you were patient enough. It is not. A light year is a distance, the distance that light travels in 1 year, and light is not patient at all. Light is the fastest thing that exists. Nothing in the universe outruns it, nothing even draws level with it, and a light year is simply how far that impossibly fast thing gets if you give it a full year to run without stopping. So already there is a small twist waiting in the definition. When you hear 1 light year, your mind wants to feel a span of time you could sit through. What the phrase actually describes is a distance so long that the fastest thing in existence needs a whole year to cross it. Those are not the same feeling at all. One is a weight, the other is a wall. And the entire distance between those two feelings, the gap between how the phrase sounds and what it means, is the country we're going to walk through together tonight. Think about why the unit exists in the first place. We invented the light year because ordinary distances break down out here. On Earth, we measure in meters and miles, and those work beautifully for roads and rivers and the height of mountains. Reach out to the moon, and the numbers are still manageable, a few 100,000 kilometers, a figure you can hold in your head. Reach to the sun, and you're already into the hundreds of millions. But try to write down the distance to the next star in kilometers, and you end up with a number that has 13 digits in it, a number no human mind can feel. So astronomers did the sensible thing. They picked the fastest, cleanest yardstick in the universe, the distance light covers in a year, and they started measuring the cosmos in those lengths instead. It was an act of mercy toward our own imaginations, and here is the quiet trap that mercy set for us. Because the light year is such a convenient unit, because it lets us write the distance to the nearest star as a friendly single digit, 4.24, We began to treat that unit as small. It became the little tick mark, the baseline, the first step. The nearest star is only a few of them. Our galaxy is 100,000 of them across. The next big galaxy is 2.5 million of them away. Against numbers like those, 1 light year feels like nothing, like the smallest change you could make, like the first easy stride of any journey outward. That feeling is the thing I want to take apart, because the entire point of tonight, the fact I am going to build for you brick by brick, is that this smallest unit, this casual first stride, this thing we treat as the baseline case is already completely beyond us. Not difficult, not expensive, beyond us by every method humanity has ever built or seriously designed. We drew a map of the universe using a ruler whose single smallest marking we cannot cross. We measure the cosmos in a unit we cannot travel. I want you to sit with how odd that is, because it is genuinely strange when you look at it head on. Imagine a map of a country, where the smallest gap between two marked towns, the little distance you would ordinarily flick past with a fingertip, turned out to be impossibly far, a gap that would take longer than all of recorded history to cross. You would stop trusting the map. You would realize the map was not drawn for creatures like you at all. That is our situation. The light year is the fine print of the universe, the smallest number on the cosmic ruler, and it sits just past the edge of everything we can reach. None of this is because we have not tried. This is not a story about a lack of nerve, or a lack of dreaming, or some failure of will that a bolder generation could fix. We have thrown machines out of the solar system. We have built engines that touch the sun. We have spent 70 years and immense fortunes hurling objects into the dark as fast as we possibly can. And tonight, you will see exactly how far all of that effort has actually carried us against the length of a single light year, and the answer is going to feel almost unbelievable the first time you hear it. We have not crossed one. We are not close to crossing one. We have not, if I am being precise about it, even finished the first day of the journey. Notice what I just did there, because it matters. I said the first day, not the first year. There is a distinction hiding in there that we will come back to near the end, one of those small phrases that will mean something entirely different by the time this night is over. For now, just hold on to the shape of the thing. Light does it in a year. That is the whole definition of the unit, the plainest fact in the topic, and I am going to keep bringing you back to it, because everything strange about tonight lives in the space between what light can do and what we can do. Light does it in a year. Hold that. We will see, again and again, how far our fastest machines fall short of that single simple line. So this is the promise I am making you for the next couple of hours. We are going to take that throwaway word, only, and we are going to earn it back. We will start with what a light year truly is, felt rather than defined. We will measure it against the fastest we have ever moved anything, and then against the fastest a human body has ever travelled, and the numbers will already begin to bend. We will find the speed we would need to make the crossing bearable, and then we will discover together the 3 separate walls that stand between us and that speed, each one enough on its own to stop us, and all 3 standing at once. We will look honestly at every escape anyone has ever proposed, the fusion engines and the antimatter, and the sails pushed by lasers, and the folding of space itself, and we will see what each one truly buys and where each one fails. And at the very end, I will give you the plain answer to the question we started with, the real number of years it takes to travel 1 light year with anything we can actually build, and I promise you it is not the number you would guess. There is a reason the word only fools us so completely, and it is worth naming, because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Our minds did not evolve to handle numbers like these. We are built to judge distances we could walk, throws we could make, the gap between one hillside and the next. When a number grows past a few thousand, the human sense of scale quietly gives up and files everything larger under a single heading, far. 1,000 kilometres and 1,000,000,000,000 kilometres both land in that same bin, the bin marked a lot, and once they are in there, they feel roughly the same size. So when someone says the nearest star is 4 light years away, and the moon is a few 100,000 kilometres away, both facts arrive wearing the same coat. Both feel like far. And nothing in our intuition warns us that one of those distances is not thousands or millions of times larger than the other, but so much larger that the comparison itself stops making sense. This is the quiet flaw the light year exploits. By giving us a small, friendly number, 4, it lets our broken sense of scale believe it has understood something it has not understood at all. 4 sounds like a handful. 4 sounds like a thing you could count on one hand and then reach out and take. And so we say only 4 light years, and we picture something like a long trip, when the truth is that the single digit is hiding a distance our minds were never equipped to feel. Tonight is, in a sense, an attempt to repair that flaw by hand, to walk the number slowly enough that your intuition cannot round it off, until the size of a single light year stops being a word and becomes something you can feel pressing on you. But we're not ready for that answer yet. Before it can mean anything, you have to feel the unit itself, not as a word but as a distance, the true reach of a single year of light. So let me take you there first, out to the edge of that one small tick on the cosmic ruler, and show you how much room is really hiding inside the word we say so lightly. Let us begin with the runner, because everything about a light year starts with the speed of light. Light moves through empty space at just under 300,000 kilometers every second. That number is so large that it slides off the mind, so let me anchor it to something your body knows. In the single second it takes you to say the word light, a beam of it has already travelled far enough to wrap around the entire Earth about 7.5 times. 1 second, 7.5 laps of the whole planet. That is the pace of the thing we're about to give a full year to run. Now hold that speed steady and let the clock run, not for a second, but for a year. Every second, another 300,000 kilometers, 60 of those in a minute, 60 of those minutes in an hour, 24 of those hours in a day, 365 and a quarter of those days in a year. When you multiply it all the way out, 1 light year comes to roughly 9.5 trillion kilometers. To be more exact about it, 9.46 trillion kilometers, or about 5.88 trillion miles. If you prefer to think in terms of our own solar system, it is about 63,000 times the distance from the Earth to the Sun, and the distance from the Earth to the Sun is already so large that sunlight, moving at that same impossible pace, takes 8 minutes and 20 seconds to reach us. I want you to feel how those two facts sit against each other, because this is the heart of it. Sunlight takes 8 minutes to cross the gap between us and the Sun, a gap of 150 million kilometers, and 1 light year is 63,000 of those gaps laid end to end. 63,000 times the reach that already takes light more than 8 minutes to cross. That is the true size of the smallest tick on the cosmic ruler. It is not a step. It is an ocean with no far shore in sight. Let me try to shrink it down to something you can hold, because trillions are just noise to the human mind. Imagine we rebuild the solar system on a tabletop, and we set the distance from the Earth to the Sun as a single ordinary stride, about 1 step of your own legs. On that scale, the whole Sun shrinks to a warm point, and the Earth is a speck a step away. Now, how far would you have to walk, 1 Earth-to-Sun stride at a time, to cover a single light year? You would have to take 63,000 of those steps. If you walked them steadily, 1 per second, without ever stopping to rest, it would take you the better part of a full day of continuous walking just to pace out 1 light year, at a scale where the entire distance to the Sun is a single step. And that, remember, is the small unit. That is the one we call only. Here is another way in, one that starts to reveal the shape of the problem we're really facing. Forget spacecraft for a moment and just think about the fastest things in your ordinary life. Picture a car on the highway, moving at a steady 100 kilometers an hour, and imagine it could somehow drive straight up off the road and out into space, never stopping, never slowing, holding that speed forever. How long would that car need to cover 1 light year? The answer is about 10.8 million years. 10 million years of continuous driving at highway speed without a single pause to cross the smallest marking on the map of the stars. If you swap the car for a passenger jet at 900 kilometers an hour, the fastest most of us will ever personally travel, you still need well over 1 million years. More than 1 million years in a jet, engines screaming the whole way, to cross 1 light year. Sit with that, because it tells you something important before we have even reached the spacecraft. The wool we are talking about tonight is not created by the limits of our technology. It shows up long before technology enters the picture. Even our fastest everyday machines, the ones we think of as genuinely quick, turn a single light year into a journey longer than the entire history of our species. The problem is not that our engines are too weak. The problem is baked into the size of the thing itself. 1 light year is so long that the ordinary meaning of the word fast simply falls apart against it. And yet, out there, this is the small number. This is where I need you to feel the vertigo of scale, gently, without any fear in it. just the quiet realignment of your sense of proportion. 1 light year, this distance that would take a jet more than 1,000,000 years to cross, is the little tick on the ruler. The nearest star system to our own, Alpha Centauri, is not 1 light year away. It is 4.24 of them, more than 4 of these million-year jet journeys stacked one behind the other. Our home galaxy, the flat wheel of stars we live inside, is about 100,000 light years across. 100,000 of these ticks side by side just to span the neighbourhood we call home. And the nearest large galaxy beyond our own, Andromeda, the faint smudge you can just see with your naked eyes on a dark night, is 2.5 million light years away. 2.5 million ticks, each one a distance that eats 1,000,000 years of a jet's life. This is why I keep calling the light year 1 tick of the ruler, and I'm going to keep calling it that, because I want the phrase to change under you as the night goes on. Right now it sounds almost dismissive. A tick, a small mark, the least significant unit on the scale. Hold on to that feeling of smallness. By the end, that same phrase, that single tick, is going to feel like something else entirely, and the distance between those two feelings will be the measure of what you have learned, because here is the fact that all of this has been building toward the plainest and most important line in the whole topic. Light does it in a year. Whatever this distance is, however many trillions of kilometers, however many million-year jet journeys it swallows, light crosses it in a single year. That is not a coincidence. That is the definition. The light year is calibrated to the fastest thing that exists, and even that fastest thing needs a full year to make the crossing. So when you ask how long it takes to travel 1 light year, you are really asking a comparison. You are asking how we, with our machines and our bodies and our brief lives, measure up against light. And the answer to that question is the entire journey of tonight. I want to be careful here, because it would be easy to hear all of this as bad news, as a wall closing in, and that is not the spirit of it at all. There is something clarifying about a true limit, something that puts the rest of life in order. The universe has drawn its map in a unit tuned to light, and in doing so it has told us something honest about our place. It has told us that even the speed limit of the universe, the fastest that cause and effect can travel, needs a year to cross the smallest gap on the chart. We are not being mocked by that. We are being shown the real scale of the room we live in, and knowing the real scale of the room is the beginning of understanding where we actually stand in it. Let me build the unit up in stages, the way you might climb a staircase, because a light year is really the top of a ladder of smaller light distances, and each rung of that ladder is worth standing on for a moment. Start with a single second of light. In 1 second, light travels about 300,000 kilometers, which happens to be close to the distance from the Earth to the Moon. So the Moon is a little more than 1 light second away, and when you look up at it, you are seeing it not quite as it is now, but as it was a moment and a bit ago. Now climb to a light minute. In 1 minute, light covers about 18 million kilometers. The Sun sits about 8 light minutes from us, which is why we said sunlight takes 8 minutes and 20 seconds to arrive. Climb again to a light hour, and you're out among the far planets. Light takes a little over 5 hours to reach Pluto at its average distance. The entire span of the planets, the whole familiar solar system we grew up drawing, is only a handful of light hours across. And now take the last step, the enormous one, from light hours to a light year. There are almost 9,000 hours in a year, so a light year is not a little bigger than the span of the planets. It is thousands of times bigger than the entire distance from the Sun to Pluto. If the whole solar system, out to the farthest planet, were the size of a coin resting on your palm, a light year would be a circle larger than a house drawn around it. That is the leap the word hides. We climb comfortably from light seconds to light minutes to light hours, each step feeling reasonable, and then the light year arrives and dwarfs the entire ladder beneath it. The unit we call small, the tick we say only, is thousands of times wider than everything we normally think of as space. There is one more comparison I want to give you, because it fixes the scale in the body better than any number can. Light, the fastest thing in the universe, could travel around the entire Earth about 7.5 times in a single second. Now imagine that same beam of light setting out to cross 1 light year. It would have to keep up that pace, 7.5 times around the whole planet every second, without pausing, without slowing, for an entire year. 31.5 million seconds, each one carrying the light another 7.5 laps of the Earth, before it finally reaches the far side of a single tick of the ruler. That is the true room inside the word only. That is 1 light year. So we have the runner, and we have the distance the runner crosses in a year. We know that a jet would need 1,000,000 years, and a car 10 million, and that even these enormous numbers describe only the smallest unit on a map that reaches into the millions of ticks. What we have not yet done is ask the real question, the one that turns this from a lesson in scale into a story about us. We have measured the light year against a car and a jet, but we have built things far faster than any jet. We have hurled machines away from the Earth at speeds no human vehicle on the ground could ever reach. So the honest next step is to take the very fastest thing our species has ever built, the record holder, the machine that has moved quicker than anything humanity has ever made, and hold it up against this single tick of the ruler. You might expect that to close the gap. Let me show you what it actually does. On the 24th of December 2024, a small machine did something no object built by human hands had ever done before. A spacecraft called the Parker Solar Probe, about the size of a small car, dropped down toward the Sun and, at its closest and fastest moment, reached a speed of 692,000 kilometers per hour. Let me put that another way, because per hour is hard to feel. That is about 192 kilometers every second. In the time it takes to read this sentence aloud, that probe would have crossed the entire United States and kept going. New York to Los Angeles in roughly 20 seconds. It is, by a wide margin, the fastest that anything humanity has ever made has ever moved. Nearly 3 times faster than the previous record. The absolute peak of 70 years of engineering, the quickest we have ever pushed a physical object. So let us do the honest thing and hold that record up against our single tick of the ruler. If the Parker Solar Probe could somehow hold that speed, that blistering 192 kilometers per second, and drive straight out toward the stars, how long would it take to cross 1 light year? The fastest object we have ever built, at its all-time record speed, would need about 1,560 years. 15 centuries. To go back 1,560 years from tonight is to land in a world before almost everything you would recognize as history, before most of the languages you know existed in their current form. And that entire span, that reach back across the whole of what we think of as the modern age, is how long our fastest machine would take to cross the smallest marking on the cosmic map. Not the distance to a star. 1 tick, 1 light year. And here is where the record turns strange, because I have not been telling you the whole truth about that speed. The Parker Solar Probe did not reach 192 kilometers per second by having some extraordinary engine. It has no such engine. It reached that speed by falling. It spent years using the gravity of Venus to bend its path closer and closer to the Sun, and that record-breaking velocity is the speed of a small object plunging down the enormous gravitational hill of our star, pulled faster and faster by the same force that holds the planets in their orbits. It is fast the way a stone is fast at the bottom of a very tall cliff, and that means 2 things, both of them humbling. The first is that the probe cannot keep that speed. It is a fall, not a cruise. As it swings past the Sun and climbs back out, it slows down again, exactly the way a ball thrown into a valley races at the bottom and loses that speed on the way back up. The record velocity exists only for a moment, at the lowest point of the plunge. There is no way to carry it out into the dark. The second thing is even stranger when you notice it. That fastest ever speed is pointed the wrong way. It is a dive inward, toward the Sun, toward the center of everything, the opposite of the direction you would need to go to leave. Our all-time speed record, the quickest we have ever moved anything, is a machine falling deeper into our own solar system, not climbing out of it. When we want to talk about crossing a light year, we do not even have a record to point to, because the fastest we have ever gone was a fall in the wrong direction. So let us set aside the falling machines and ask about the ones that carry people. What is the fastest a human being has ever travelled? The answer takes us back to the crews of the Apollo missions, the astronauts who went to the moon. On the return from that journey, riding the gravity of the Earth as they came home, the crew of Apollo 10 reached a speed of about 39,900 kilometers per hour, a little under 11 kilometers per second. That is still the human speed record, and it has stood for more than half a century. It is a genuinely fast thing, faster than any bullet, faster than anything you will ever personally experience, and at that speed, the fastest any human being has ever moved, 1 light year would take about 27,000 years. 27,000 years. Longer than the time since human beings painted the walls of the first caves. That is the crossing of a single tick at the record speed of a living person. I want to gather these numbers together, because laid side by side they tell a story that no single one of them tells alone. Light crosses 1 light year in 1 year. The fastest object we have ever built would take 15 centuries, and it cannot even hold the speed that gives that number. The fastest human being who ever lived would take 27,000 years. A jet would take more than 1 million. A car, more than 10 million. And every one of those numbers is for 1 light year, the small unit, the tick we call only when we say the nearest star is only 4 of them away. There is a pattern in those numbers, and the pattern is not encouraging. It says that the gap between light and us is not a small gap that a better engine might close. It is a gap of a different kind, a gap so wide that the difference between a car and the fastest machine we have ever flown barely registers against it. There is one more thing I want to plant here, gently, because it will grow into something important later. I have been telling you how slowly we can send objects across a light year, but there is one thing we can already send across that distance at full speed, right now, tonight, with technology we have had for 100 years. We can send light. More precisely, we can send radio, which is a form of light, and radio moves at exactly the speed the unit is named for. Every radio broadcast, every signal we have ever transmitted, races outward across the dark at the full speed of light, crossing a light year in a single year. Our oldest transmissions are already more than 90 light years out into the galaxy. So here is the quiet, strange truth sitting underneath all these numbers. We can already reach across a light year. We do it constantly. We just cannot send any part of ourselves. We can throw our voice across that gap in a year. We cannot throw a single gram of matter across it in less than thousands. We can wave across the dark. We cannot walk into it. Keep that image close, because we will return to it at the very end, and it will have grown heavier by then. For now, it is only a curiosity, a small asymmetry between what we can send as light and what we can send as stuff. But it is going to turn out to be the whole story in miniature, the difference between a species that can signal and a species that can travel, and we are for the moment only the first kind. It is worth understanding why the Parker Solar Probe had to fall to go so fast, because the story reveals something about how trapped we really are at the bottom of the sun's gravity. You might think that to dive close to the sun, you simply point a rocket at it and fire. But the Earth is moving sideways around the sun at about 30 kilometers per second, and everything launched from Earth inherits that sideways motion. To fall straight toward the sun, a probe has to first cancel almost all of that sideways speed, and we have no rocket powerful enough to do that directly. So the Parker probe did it the slow way, by flying past Venus 7 times over the course of 6 years, using the planet's gravity to bleed off a little of its sideways motion on each pass, letting it fall closer and closer to the sun each time. Its record speed is the reward for 6 years of patient gravitational bank shots, and it is, at bottom, the speed of a thing that has finally been allowed to fall. The fastest we have ever moved anything is not a triumph of engines, it is a triumph of falling, engineered with great care. And to survive that fall, the probe carries a shield, a slab of carbon composite only a few inches thick, that holds its sunward face at thousands of degrees, while the instruments behind it sit at room temperature. It is a marvel, and it is also a reminder of the scale of what we're up against, because all of that ingenuity, the shield and the 7 flybys and the 6 years of manoeuvring, buys us a machine that would still need 15 centuries to cross 1 light year, in a direction it cannot actually go. We have poured our best engineering into touching our own star, and touching our own star turns out to be almost nothing at all against the gap to the next one. Now let me return to that one thing we can already send across a light year, because I want it to sink in before we move on. Radio waves are light. They travel at the full speed of light, the same 300,000 kilometers per second, and they do not tire and do not slow. We have been broadcasting them for about 100 years, which means that a sphere of our radio signals, our voices and our music and our old transmissions, has been expanding outward from the Earth this whole time, at the speed the light year is named for, and its leading edge is now more than 90 light years away in every direction. More than 90 ticks of the ruler, crossed already, by us tonight. We have reached across 90 light years, but not one atom of us has gone with it. The signals crossed because they are light, and light crosses a light year in a year, effortlessly, by definition. Our bodies, our machines, our matter, stay behind at a fraction of that speed. Hold that split in your mind. The part of us made of light is already far out among the stars. The part of us made of matter has not finished its first day. So we have measured the light year against our fastest machine and our fastest bodies, and instead of closing the gap, the record holders have only shown us how enormous it is. 15 centuries for the quickest object we have ever built, and even that was a fall in the wrong direction. But there is a difference between how fast a thing can move for a single moment and how far it has actually gone. The Parker Solar Probe touched its record speed for an instant and then climbed away from it. I want to show you a different machine now, one that never broke any speed record at all, but that has been flying outward, steadily, without stopping, for nearly 50 years. I want to show you the farthest any human object has ever travelled, and exactly how far into a single light year that lifetime of flight has actually carried it. What we find out there is going to reframe everything. In the autumn of 1977, before most people alive today were born, a machine left Earth that has never come back and never will. It is called Voyager 1, and it is the farthest thing our species has ever placed in the universe. It is not fast by the standards we just discussed. It moves at about 17 kilometers per second, quick enough to cross from one side of a city to the other in a blink, but nothing like the falling record of the Parker probe. What makes Voyager 1 extraordinary is not its speed, it is its endurance. It has been flying outward, away from the sun, in a straight line into the dark for nearly 50 years without stopping. And in 2026 it is about to reach a milestone that says everything about the problem we are circling tonight. Right now, Voyager 1 is roughly 25.5 billion kilometers from Earth. That is such a great distance that a radio signal from home, moving at the speed of light, takes almost a full day to reach it. And on the 18th of November, 2026, it crosses a line no human object has ever crossed. On that date, Voyager 1 becomes the first thing we have ever built to be one full light day away from Earth. One light day. The distance light travels in 24 hours. After nearly 50 years of continuous flight, our farthest and most enduring machine will finally be one day of light travel from home. I want you to stop and feel the shape of that, because it is the single most important comparison in this entire night, and it lands quietly if you're not ready for it. A light year is made of days, the same way an ordinary year is. There are 365.25 light days in one light year, and Voyager 1, after half a century of flight, after crossing the orbits of the giant planets and pushing out past the edge of the sun's influence into true interstellar space, is about to complete its first light day. 1 out of 365. To finish a single light year at this pace, it would need to keep flying not for another 50 years, but for something closer to 18,000 years. Let me say that number again slowly, because it is the answer to a question you did not quite realize you had asked. Our farthest machine, the one that has travelled longer and reached deeper than anything we have ever made, is moving toward one light year at a rate that would take about 18,000 years to complete. It has been going since 1977, and it has covered a little more than 1/4% of a single light year. The rest, the other 99.7% of that one small tick, still lies ahead. A road so long that if Voyager had launched at the dawn of human agriculture, at the very beginning of settled civilization, it would still not have arrived. It would still have thousands of years left to go. Come out there with me for a moment, out to where it is, because I think you should stand beside it before we go any further. Picture the probe as it actually is tonight. It is a small thing, smaller than a car, a framework of aged metal and instruments built with the technology of the 1970s. Its nuclear heart, a slowly cooling lump of plutonium, has been fading for decades, and one by one its instruments have gone dark to save the last trickle of power. Around it, in every direction, there is almost nothing. The sun is behind it, reduced to the brightest star in a sky full of stars, no longer warm, no longer close, just one more point of light among thousands. There is no up and no down out there, no air, no sound, only the slow drift of the machine through a darkness so complete that the nearest star ahead of it is still tens of thousands of years away. And at this moment, at this line it is crossing, a message sent from the world that built it, moving at the fastest speed the universe allows, would take a full day to arrive. A full day, just to say hello, at the speed of light. This is one light day, and a light year is 365 of these stacked one behind the other into a dark that Voyager will still be crossing long after everyone who ever worked on it is gone, long after the language they spoke has changed beyond recognition. That is the fact I most want you to carry out of tonight, if you carry only one. We have not crossed a light year. We have not come anywhere near crossing a light year. Our single greatest achievement in throwing an object into the dark, the farthest reach of everything our species has ever done in space, is about to complete its first light day, and a light year is more than 300 of those. When you next read that the nearest star is only 4 light years away, I want you to remember Voyager, half a century out, finishing its first day. Only 4 light years is only about 1,460 light days, and we have done one. There is something almost tender in this. Not tragic, but tender, if you let yourself feel it the right way. Voyager 1 carries with it a golden record, a disk of sounds and images from Earth, a greeting placed aboard in case anything ever finds it. The people who built it knew, even then, that it would never reach another star in any time frame that meant anything to a human life. They sent it anyway, as far as our best effort could throw it, and our best effort, measured against the ruler of the stars, has carried it 1 light day in 50 years. That is not a failure. It is an honest measurement of where we stand. It is the truest picture we have of the gap between what we can reach with our voice and what we can reach with our hands. And notice, again, the phrase that keeps returning, the plainest line in the topic: light does it in a year. Light crosses this whole distance, the full light year, in the time it takes the Earth to go once around the Sun. Voyager, our farthest child, our longest reach, crosses 1/365th of that same distance in 50 years. The gap between light and us is not narrowing. It is the widest thing in this story. Light does it in a year. We do it in 18,000. Everything else tonight is going to be an attempt to close that gap, and everything else tonight is going to fail, and I want you to already feel why. Standing out here beside this small, fading machine at the end of its first day, I want to linger a little longer beside Voyager, because the details of its situation say more than any single number. It has already, years ago, crossed out of the region where the sun's wind of particles holds sway, and passed into true interstellar space, the region between the stars. That crossing was a real border, one of the great moments in the history of exploration, and yet when Voyager made it, nothing changed in the view. There was no wall, no gate, no marker. The sun simply continued to shrink behind it, one bright point among many, and the dark ahead stayed dark. That is what the space between the stars is actually like. Not a dramatic frontier, but an almost perfect emptiness so wide that even crossing its first threshold takes a machine nearly half a century, and even then leaves it with the overwhelming majority of a single light year still ahead. The probe is running out of power now, slowly, the way a candle burns down. Its warmth comes from a lump of slowly decaying plutonium, and that source has been weakening a little every year since 1977. So the engineers who still tend it have been switching off its instruments one by one, choosing which senses to keep and which to let go dark, to stretch the last trickle of power a few more years. Before long, it will fall silent entirely, not because anything broke, but because the warmth simply ran out. And then it will keep going anyway, cold and quiet, still moving at 17 kilometers per second, still crossing that first light year, for thousands of years after the last signal fades. It does not need power to keep travelling. It needs power only to keep talking to us. The journey itself continues in silence, long after we lose the ability to hear it. It carries with it a message, famously, a golden record fixed to its side, engraved with sounds and images from Earth, greetings in many languages, music, the noise of rain and heartbeats, placed there in case anything ever finds it in the distant future. The people who built it understood, even as they attached that record, that it would not reach another star in any span of time that means anything to a human being. They knew Voyager would still be crossing its first few light years long after our civilization had changed beyond recognition. They sent the message anyway, as a gesture across time rather than distance, a note from a species that could throw an object 1 light day in 50 years, and wanted, even so, to say hello to whatever might one day cross its path. There is something in that gesture that holds the whole spirit of tonight, the reaching that continues even when the reaching cannot arrive. And this, finally, is the measure I want fixed in you. Voyager is the farthest, longest, most patient reach our species has ever made into the dark, and after nearly 50 years, it is completing its first light day. To turn that one light day into 1 light year, it would have to repeat this entire 50-year journey more than 360 times over. Not once more, 360 times more. And a light year is the small unit, the single tick, the one we say only when we point at the nearest star. So the picture is now clear, and it is stark. We have measured a single light year against everything we have. Against a car, a jet, the fastest object we ever built, the fastest human who ever lived, and finally against the farthest machine we have ever flown, given 50 years to run. And in every single case, the answer has come back in thousands or millions of years for one tick of the ruler. At this point, a reasonable person asks the obvious question, the one that has probably been forming in your mind for the last few minutes. If our current machines are this hopeless, then how fast would we actually need to go? What is the speed that would turn a light year from an 18,000-year impossibility into something a person could imagine surviving? There is an answer to that question, and it is a clean, simple number. And the moment we find it, a door seems to open. Let me show you that door before I show you what stands behind it. Let me pause here and gather up what we have, because we have covered a lot of ground, and it helps to set the pieces on the table before we pick up the next one. We started with a single word, only, and the phrase that hides inside it, only 4 light years to the nearest star. We took the smallest unit on that phrase, 1 light year, and we found that it is a distance of about 9.5 trillion kilometers, so long that a jet would need more than 1 million years to cross it. We measured it against the fastest object we have ever built, and got 15 centuries against a fall in the wrong direction. We measured it against the farthest machine we have ever flown and found Voyager, after half a century, completing its first light day out of the 365 that make a light year, and underneath all of it, we found one clean line that keeps returning. Light does it in a year. We do it in thousands. So now we ask the constructive question, the hopeful one. Forget what we have. What would we need? If a light year is going to become something a human being could actually cross, or at least imagine crossing, what speed would it take? And here at last the numbers become friendly, because the arithmetic of this part is simple and clean. The speed of light is the yardstick, so let us just take fractions of it and see what each one buys. Suppose we could travel at 1% of the speed of light. That is already an almost absurd speed by any standard we have ever achieved, about 3,000 kilometers per second, more than 15 times faster than the falling record of the Parker probe, and held steady not for a moment but for the whole journey. At 1% of light speed, 1 light year takes 100 years. A century. Still longer than a human life. But suddenly we are in the range of things a civilization could think about, a journey a family might begin and their descendants might finish. The impossible 18,000 years has become 100. That is what raw speed does to this problem. It does not chip away at it. It collapses it. Now push a little further. Suppose we could reach 10% of the speed of light. That is 30,000 kilometers per second, a truly enormous velocity, and at that speed 1 light year takes just 10 years. 10 years. That is a long expedition, but it is a human one. It is less than the time it takes to raise a child to adolescence. A person could leave, cross a full light year, and still be there to tell the story, and if we could somehow reach 20% of light speed, 1 light year would take only 5 years, a single ambitious voyage, a thing you could plan a career around. Do you feel it? Do you feel the door swinging open? The entire crushing weight of the first half of tonight, the 18,000 years, the million-year jets, all of it seems to dissolve the moment we start talking in real fractions of the speed of light. The problem was never the distance, some quiet voice says. The problem was just that we have been going too slowly. Go fast enough, 1/10 of light speed, and a light year becomes an ordinary long trip. I want to let that hope breathe for a moment, because it is a real hope, and it deserves honesty rather than a cheap trick. This is genuinely the answer. There is no other. If humanity is ever going to cross a light year in a human span of years, it will be by reaching some meaningful fraction of the speed of light, somewhere in the neighborhood of 1/10 of it. Everything else, every scheme and dream we will look at for the rest of tonight, is really just a different attempt to reach that one number. 10% of the speed of light. That is the door. That is the speed that turns the smallest tick on the cosmic ruler from an 18,000-year wall into a 10-year expedition. So the whole question of tonight, the whole question of whether a light year is forever or merely far, comes down to a single, seemingly practical matter. Can we get a machine, or a person, up to 1/10 of the speed of light? It sounds like an engineering problem. It sounds like the kind of thing that is merely very hard. The way building a bridge across a wide river is very hard. The kind of problem that yields to enough cleverness, and enough money and enough time. We went from the first powered flight to the surface of the moon in 66 years. Surely, given a century or two, we could push a probe to 1/10 of light speed. Surely that is a matter of bigger engines, better fuel, more ambition. That is exactly what almost everyone assumes the first time they think about it, and it is exactly where the real strangeness of tonight begins. Because reaching 1/10 of the speed of light is not like building a bigger bridge. It is not a difference of degree. When you actually sit down and work out what it would take to push even a small object up to that speed, you do not find a hard engineering problem. You find a wall, and then, behind that wall, you find a second wall, and behind that, a third. There are 3 separate barriers standing between us and that 1/10 of light speed, and this is the part I most want you to understand tonight, because it is the part almost no one is ever shown. Each of these 3 walls on its own is enough to stop us cold, not slow us down, stop us, and all 3 of them stand at once. The first wall is the sheer energy it takes to make something move that fast, the raw cost written in a currency so large it is hard to name. The second wall is the cruelty of how rockets actually work, the reason you cannot simply build a bigger engine and pour in more fuel, a piece of mathematics so unforgiving it feels almost like a joke the universe is playing. And the third wall is the one that waits at the far end, the problem of stopping, which doubles everything and turns even a triumphant crossing into a kind of heartbreak. We're going to walk up to each of these 3 walls in turn, and by the time we have seen all 3, you will understand not just that we have never crossed a light year, but why the reasons run so much deeper than a lack of trying. I want to be honest about why 1/10 of the speed of light, and not some higher or lower number, has become the quiet standard that serious people aim at. It is a compromise between the possible and the bearable. Go much slower than that, down to 1% of light speed, and a single light year takes a century, which pushes any real journey out of the reach of a single human life, and into the territory of ships that must carry generations, a whole separate nightmare of its own. Go much faster, up toward the speed of light itself, and the costs we're about to meet explode past even the theoretical. 1/10 of light speed sits at the hinge, the slowest speed that still lets a crossing of a few light years fit inside something like a human span, and the fastest speed whose costs are merely astronomical rather than literally infinite. That is why, whenever engineers sit down to sketch a real interstellar probe, they tend to converge on that same neighborhood. It is the eye of the needle, the one place where the journey and the human lifetime almost overlap. And notice how strange it is that the answer to the whole problem is simply a number on the speedometer. Not a new kind of space, not a shortcut, not a trick of geometry, just raw speed, 1/10 of the way to light. Everything about crossing a light year in a bearable time reduces to that single quantity. If you had it, the distance would take care of itself. The trillions of kilometers, the emptiness, the dark, none of it would matter, because at 1/10 of light speed you would simply eat 1 light year every 10 years and keep going. The distance was never really the enemy. The speed we cannot reach is the enemy. And so the entire rest of tonight is not about distance at all. It is about that one number and the walls that stand between us and it. The distance is settled, only the speed remains, and the speed is where reality closes its fist. So let us walk up to the first wall together, the one made of pure energy. We have found the speed we need, 1/10 of the speed of light, and we have felt the door open. Now I am going to show you exactly what it costs to walk through it. And the price, when you finally see it written out in full, is going to be measured in a unit you would never expect, a unit that has nothing to do with money or time and everything to do with fire. To move something is to give it energy, and the faster you want it to go, the more energy it takes. That much is intuitive. What is not intuitive, what almost no one carries in their gut, is how brutally that cost climbs as the speed rises. The energy of motion does not grow in step with speed. It grows with the square of speed. Double how fast you want to go, and you need 4 times the energy. Go 10 times faster, and you need 100 times the energy. This one fact, this squaring, is the first wall, and it is the reason that reaching 1/10 of the speed of light is not a hard problem but a monstrous one. Let me make it concrete, because numbers this large only mean something when you tie them to a thing you can picture. Imagine the most modest interstellar probe you could seriously propose. Not a starship, not a colony, just a single machine weighing about 1 metric ton, roughly the mass of a small car carrying instruments and a transmitter, nothing more. Now let us ask the simplest possible question. How much pure energy must we pour into that 1-ton probe just to get it moving at 1/10 of the speed of light, the speed we decided was the door? Set aside, for now, every question of how we deliver that energy. Set aside the engine, the fuel, the losses, just the raw energy of the motion itself, the minimum the universe demands, no matter how cleverly you do it. The answer is about 450 quadrillion joules. That number is meaningless written out, so let me translate it into the only unit that makes it land. It is roughly the energy of 7,000 of the atomic bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima. 7,000. Take a moment with that. To accelerate a single 1-ton probe, one small machine the size of a car, up to 1/10 of the speed of light, you must channel into it the energy of about 7,000 atomic bombs, and that is the flaw, the perfect and impossible ideal, the amount you would need if not one particle of energy were wasted, if every joule went flawlessly into motion. In reality, no engine is perfect, and the true figure would be several times higher still. And remember what that 7,000 bombs actually buys you. It does not buy you a fast crossing. It buys you 1/10 of the speed of light, which means 1 light year in 10 years. It buys you a probe that is still, by the measure of light, 1,800 times too slow to keep pace with the thing the unit is named for. 7,000 bombs poured into one small machine, and it would still take a decade to cross the smallest tick on the ruler. If you wanted to go twice as fast, 20% of light speed, and cross a light year in 5 years, the squaring law bites again, and the energy climbs to around 29,000 Hiroshima bombs for that same single ton. The faster you try to go, the more savagely the price rises, always faster than the speed itself. Come stand beside the probe at the moment of launch, and let me try to make this real rather than numerical. The machine sits there, small and ordinary, a ton of metal and circuitry, nothing about it suggesting what is about to happen. And then the energy begins to flow into it, not the gentle push of a rocket lifting off a pad, but the equivalent of thousands of the most destructive weapons our species has ever built. All of it somehow funneled not into a fireball, not into light and heat thrown outward, but entirely into the forward motion of this one small object. Imagine the fire of 7,000 bombs, and imagine every last spark of it going cleanly into pushing a single, car-sized machine faster and faster. There is no explosion you could watch. There is only the probe, gathering speed in perfect silence, climbing toward 192,000 kilometers per second, drinking the energy of a war and turning it into velocity. And when it is finally done, when all of that fire has been spent, the machine is moving at 1/10 of the speed of light, and it will still need 10 full years to cross 1 light year. That is the mismatch at the heart of tonight, laid bare. The effort is the energy of thousands of bombs. The reward is a crossing that still takes a decade for the smallest unit on the map. This is the moment I most want you to feel, and I want you to feel it not as fear, but as a particular kind of clarity. We tend to believe quietly that the reason we have not reached the stars is a failure of nerve, or of ambition, or of investment. We tell ourselves that if we only wanted it badly enough, if we only pointed enough of our will and our money at the problem, we could do it. And what the first wall reveals is that this is simply not true. The barrier is not our courage. It is not our budget. It is arithmetic, the plain relationship between energy and speed, and the arithmetic does not care how badly we want to cross. You could take every weapon our species has ever built, every reserve of energy we have ever gathered, and pour it into a single probe, and you would still be haggling over 1/10 of the speed of light for one small machine. The wall is not made of our weakness. It is made of the structure of reality, and that is a very different thing to stand in front of. There is a strange peace in that, once the initial vertigo passes. We are not failing. We are meeting a limit that was always there, written into the relationship between motion and energy, waiting for us to grow up enough to see it. And I have been generous so far because I have only shown you the energy of the motion itself, the ideal minimum. I have said nothing yet about how you would actually deliver that energy to the probe, how you would carry it, where it would come from, how the engine would work. I have been letting you imagine that the 7,000 bombs simply appear inside the machine and push it along. But of course they do not. The energy has to come from somewhere. It has to be carried or beamed or burned, and the moment you ask how a real rocket would actually carry the fuel to release that energy, you walk straight into the second wall, and the second wall is, if anything, even stranger and more unforgiving than the first. The first wall told you the price. The second wall is going to tell you that you cannot afford to carry the money. Let me set that 7,000 bombs against the scale of what our whole civilization produces, because the comparison cuts both ways and both cuts are worth feeling. In a full year, all of humanity together, every power plant and engine and furnace on Earth, uses an amount of energy that is, in fact, larger than the kinetic energy of our 1-ton probe at 1/10 of light speed. So in one sense, the raw energy is not beyond us. If we could gather a few days of the entire planet's output and pour it, perfectly, into a single small probe, we would have the motion we need. That sounds almost hopeful. But now remember two things that turn the hope back to stone. First, that figure is for one small probe of a single ton, carrying almost nothing. Scale it up to anything that could carry people, and the energy scales with it, ton for ton, until you're talking not about days of the planet's output but years or centuries of it, for a single ship. And second, we have no way to gather days of the whole world's energy and deliver it flawlessly into one machine. We cannot even store a meaningful fraction of it. The energy exists in principle and evaporates in practice, and that gap between principle and practice is where the dream keeps dying. And I have been kind, because I quoted you the perfect figure, the energy of the motion itself, as if every joule could be delivered without loss. No engine works that way. A real drive wastes most of what it consumes, throwing energy away as heat and light and exhaust that does not push in quite the right direction. Depending on the method, you might need several times the ideal energy, sometimes far more, to actually end up with a probe moving at 1/10 of light speed. So the true bill is not 7,000 bombs. It is 7,000 bombs as an absolute floor, a floor no real machine reaches, with the actual cost climbing well above it. The perfect case is already beyond us. The real case is worse. Sit for one more moment with the image of that probe at launch, drinking the fire of thousands of weapons and turning it silently into speed, because I think it holds the emotional truth of the whole night. We imagine the barrier to the stars as something we might overcome with resolve, the way we overcame the ocean or the sky. But the ocean and the sky never asked us for the energy of thousands of bombs to move a single small object a fraction of the way toward the nearest star. This barrier is not asking for our courage. It is presenting us with a bill, written in the plain currency of energy, and the bill does not shrink no matter how much we want to cross. There is something almost clarifying in standing before a limit like that. It is not personal. It is not a punishment. It is simply the price the universe charges for speed, the same price for everyone, everywhere, forever, and no amount of wanting changes a single digit of it. Because here is the problem that the energy figure alone conceals. A rocket does not have its energy handed to it from outside. It has to carry its fuel with it, and that fuel has weight, and that weight itself has to be accelerated, which takes more fuel, which adds more weight. There is a loop hiding in there, a loop that turns vicious very quickly, and when you follow it all the way down for a target like 1/10 of the speed of light, it produces a number so absurd that the first time you see it, you will think I have made a mistake. I have not. Let me show you the second wall, the one that stands between the energy we need and any rocket that could ever deliver it, and let me show you why, for this problem, a bigger rocket is not a better answer but a worse one. Every rocket that has ever flown works by throwing something backward. It carries a store of fuel, it burns that fuel and hurls the exhaust out behind it at high speed, and the push of that exhaust drives the rocket forward. This is the only way we have ever moved through space, and it is a beautiful, simple idea. But it carries inside it a trap, a piece of logic so unforgiving that it has its own name among engineers, and it is the second wall standing between us and 1/10 of the speed of light. The trap is this: a rocket has to carry its own fuel, and that fuel has mass, and that mass too has to be accelerated along with everything else, right up until the moment it is burned. So if you want to go faster, you need more fuel. But that extra fuel adds weight, and now you need still more fuel to accelerate the fuel you just added, and that additional fuel adds more weight again, demanding yet more fuel to move it. You can see the loop. Every kilogram of fuel you add to go faster must itself be carried and accelerated by the fuel beneath it, and the whole tower feeds on itself. For small increases in speed, this is manageable. The loop stays gentle, but as your target speed climbs higher and higher above the speed of your exhaust, the loop stops being gentle and becomes explosive in the mathematical sense. The amount of fuel you need does not rise steadily, it rises exponentially. There is an equation that describes this exactly, worked out more than a century ago by a self-taught Russian schoolteacher named Konstantin Tsiolkovsky, and it is the foundation of all rocketry. You do not need the equation itself tonight, you only need the shape of what it says, which is this. The ratio between how much your rocket weighs full of fuel and how much it weighs empty grows exponentially with the speed you want to reach, divided by the speed of your exhaust. In plain terms, if the speed you want is not too much greater than the speed at which you can throw your exhaust, the loop stays kind. But if the speed you want is many, many times greater than your exhaust speed, the loop turns monstrous, and the fuel you need balloons past every sane limit. So let us feed 1/10 of the speed of light into that logic and see what falls out. Start with a chemical rocket, the kind that actually flies today, the kind that put people on the moon. A chemical rocket throws its exhaust out at a speed of about 4.5 kilometers per second. That is a fine speed for leaving Earth. But 1/10 of the speed of light is 30,000 kilometers per second, nearly 7,000 times faster than the exhaust. Feed that enormous ratio into the exponential loop, and the amount of fuel you need to reach 1/10 of light speed with a chemical rocket comes out as a number I have to describe rather than write, because writing it would fill this page with zeros. The ratio of fuel to payload is a one followed by more than 2,900 zeros. To grasp how insane that is, consider that the entire observable universe contains only about a 1 followed by 80 zeros of atoms, every particle in every star in every galaxy we can see. The chemical rocket does not need a fuel tank the size of a building, or a planet, or a star. It needs a fuel tank containing more matter than exists in the universe, and not by a little, but by thousands of orders of magnitude. A chemical rocket to 1/10 of light speed is not difficult. It is not expensive. It is impossible in the most complete sense the word has. Now, you might reasonably say, then let us not use a chemical rocket. Let us use something with a faster exhaust, because the whole problem was that the exhaust was too slow compared to our target. And this is exactly the right instinct, and it is exactly what every serious interstellar engineer has pursued. So let us climb the ladder of better engines and watch what happens. Move up to an ion drive, the most efficient kind of engine we have actually flown, which throws its exhaust out not at 4 kilometers per second, but at around 30. That is a huge improvement, nearly 7 times faster exhaust. And it helps enormously. The fuel ratio drops from a 1 followed by 2,900 zeros down to a 1 followed by about 430 zeros, which is to say, it goes from unimaginably catastrophically impossible to merely unimaginably catastrophically impossible. 430 zeros is still hundreds of orders of magnitude beyond the number of atoms in the universe. The 7 times better engine did not crack the problem, it barely scratched it. This is the moment the second wall shows its real face, and it is worth pausing on, because it overturns the intuition almost everyone brings to this. The lesson of the rocket equation is not we need a bigger rocket. It is the opposite. Beyond a certain point, a bigger rocket is a worse rocket, because past a certain speed, every kilogram of fuel you add is spending more of itself carrying the fuel around it than actually pushing you forward. You cannot brute force your way to 1/10 of the speed of light by building something enormous. The enormity works against you. The tower of fuel collapses under its own weight of logic. What you need is not more fuel. What you need is a fundamentally faster exhaust, so that the ratio at the heart of the equation stays sane. So how fast does the exhaust have to be before the numbers finally become livable? You have to climb the ladder much, much higher, past ion drives, past anything we have ever operated, all the way up to the kind of engine that does not yet exist outside of design studies. A fusion rocket, one that fuses hydrogen the way the sun does and throws the leavings out the back, could in principle produce an exhaust speed of around 10,000 kilometers per second. And at that exhaust speed, something remarkable finally happens to the arithmetic. The fuel ratio to reach 1/10 of light speed drops from a number with hundreds of zeros all the way down to roughly 10. 10 to 1. 10 kilograms of fuel for every kilogram of payload. That is a real number. That is an engineering problem rather than a cosmic joke. That is the first rung on this ladder where the rocket equation stops laughing at us. And that is precisely why every serious proposal for crossing interstellar distances is built around fusion, or around something even more extreme, and never around the chemical rockets that actually fly today. The gap between what we use and what we would need is not a gap of degree. It is the difference between throwing your exhaust at 4 kilometers per second and throwing it at 10,000. You might think there is an obvious way around this, and it is worth addressing, because clever people always raise it. What about staging? Real rockets, the ones that reach orbit, are built in stages. They burn the first stage, drop the empty tank and light the next, so they are not dragging dead weight the whole way up. Why not stage all the way to 1/10 of light speed, shedding tanks as you go? The answer is that staging helps, but it does not change the exponential nature of the problem, only softens its edge a little. Each stage still has to carry all the stages above it, fully fueled, and the tower of fuel still grows exponentially with the speed you are chasing. Staging is why the rockets that put people on the moon needed to be enormous to deliver a tiny capsule, a machine of some 3,000 tons to send about 45 tons toward the moon. That was already the exponential loop biting, for a target speed of only about 11 kilometers per second. Now aim not for 11 kilometers per second, but for 30,000, 1/10 of light speed, nearly 3,000 times faster, and the same exponential loop that made the moon rocket a giant makes the light speed rocket larger than the universe. Staging trims the exponent, it does not repeal it. And the ion drive I mentioned, the efficient one, deserves a real face, because we have actually flown it, and its story shows the trap from the other side. We have sent probes to the asteroid belt running on ion engines that sip their fuel and throw it out far faster than any chemical rocket, exactly the improvement the rocket equation rewards. And those probes are genuinely efficient, able to change their speed over a whole mission by more than a chemical craft of the same fuel could manage. But they do it slowly, building up speed over months and years of the gentlest possible push, and even after all that patience, the total speed they gain is measured in tens of kilometers per second, not tens of thousands. The most efficient engine we have ever actually operated, given years to work, reaches a speed that is still about 1,000 times too slow for a bearable light-year crossing. The efficient engine helps, and the help is real, and the help is nowhere near enough. That is the second wall in one sentence. Every real improvement we make is swallowed whole by the size of the gap. So the second wall has taught us something the first wall could not. The energy alone was daunting, 7,000 bombs for a single probe, but the rocket equation tells us we cannot even deliver that energy in the ordinary way, because carrying the fuel to release it makes the tank heavier than the universe. Unless, that is, we can find a way to stop carrying the fuel at all. And that thought, that single rebellious idea, is the one genuine escape anyone has ever found from the tyranny of the rocket equation. What if the ship did not have to carry its own energy? What if we left the fuel at home, here in our own solar system, and reached across the dark to push the probe from behind? It sounds like a cheat, and in the best possible way, it almost is. Let me show you the one idea that slips past the second wall, and let me also show you the smaller, sharper wall it runs into instead. The one great escape from the rocket equation is almost childishly simple to state. The problem was that the ship had to carry its own fuel, and carrying the fuel was what made everything collapse. So do not carry it. Leave the energy source at home, anchored safely in our own solar system, and use it to push the ship from behind across the dark. If the probe does not have to haul its own power plant, then the vicious loop of fuel accelerating fuel never begins. The tower of impossible mass simply vanishes, because there is no tower. You have moved the engine off the ship entirely. This is the idea behind a project that was announced with great fanfare in 2016, called Breakthrough Starshot, and it remains the most serious attempt anyone has ever made to actually cross an interstellar distance within a human lifetime. The concept is elegant enough to take your breath for a moment. Instead of a great ship, you build something almost impossibly small, a chip of electronics attached to a thin reflective sail, the two together weighing about as much as a paperclip. A few grams, no more, and instead of an engine you build, back on Earth or in orbit around it, an enormous array of lasers, a bank of them working together with a combined power of around 100 gigawatts. To feel that number, 100 gigawatts is roughly the focused output of 100 large nuclear power plants, all firing at once, concentrated into a single beam and aimed at that tiny sail. Then you pull the trigger. For a few minutes, that immense beam of light pours onto the little sail, and light, though it has no mass, does carry a gentle push, a pressure. Concentrate enough of it on something light enough, and that gentle push becomes a savage shove. In those few minutes of laser fire, the tiny sail is driven up to around 20% of the speed of light, not a tenth, a fifth, the very speed we said would cross a light year in 5 years, and it reaches that speed not over years of burning fuel, but in minutes, because it is not burning anything at all. It is simply being pushed by a beam of light from 100 power plants worth of lasers, while all of that machinery, all of that mass and complexity stays safely at home. The probe itself carries nothing but a sail and a chip. The rocket equation has been beaten, not by a better engine, but by refusing to play its game. For a moment, this feels like the answer, the door we were looking for finally swinging fully open, and I want to be fair to it, because within its own limits the physics genuinely works. Light does push. A sail that light could, in principle, be driven to a fifth of light speed by a beam that powerful. This is not fantasy. But the escape comes at a price, and the price reveals a new and smaller wall standing just behind the one we slipped past. Because notice what we had to give up to leave the fuel at home. We had to shrink the entire ship down to the mass of a paperclip, and a paperclip cannot carry very much. That is the first catch, and it is severe. A few grams is enough for a tiny camera, a minimal transmitter, a sliver of electronics, and almost nothing else. There is no room for a proper scientific laboratory, no room for the large antenna you would want to send data back across light years, no room for shielding, no room for anything that could keep a delicate machine alive through decades of interstellar radiation. The moment you make the probe heavy enough to carry real instruments, its mass climbs, and the laser that could push a paperclip to a fifth of light speed can barely nudge a heavier craft. The escape only works for things almost too small to be useful. You can send a whisper, but not a voice. And there is a second catch, which is the one that will occupy us for the rest of this stretch of the journey, because it is the third great wall in its own right. The laser can push the sail up to a fifth of the speed of light, but the laser is here, at home. Once the probe is out there, screaming across the dark at 60,000 kilometers per second, there is no beam reaching ahead of it to slow it down. The sail can be pushed from behind on the way out. It cannot be caught from in front on the way in, which means that even in the best possible case, even if everything works perfectly, the probe does not arrive anywhere. It flies through. It crosses its light year in 5 years and then keeps right on going, past whatever it came to see, unable to stop, unable to stay. And there is a third catch, quieter and sadder than the others, which is simply what has happened to the project itself. For all its elegance, Breakthrough Starshot has, as of the middle of this decade, gone largely dormant. The money that launched it has thinned. The stream of announcements has slowed to a trickle. There has been occasional work, some interesting research into sails designed by artificial intelligence reported as recently as late 2025, but the great push, the actual building of the laser array and the sails, has quietly stalled. The single most serious attempt our species has ever made to cross a light year in a human span of years is, for now, sitting still. Not disproven, not abandoned with any ceremony, just paused, the way ambitious things pause when the arithmetic underneath them stays stubbornly hard. I do not tell you that to be bleak, but because it completes the honest picture. We found the one true escape from the rocket equation, the beautiful trick of leaving the fuel at home, and we found that it works only for something the size of a paperclip, that it cannot stop at the far end, and that even so, even reduced to its most minimal form, it has proven hard enough that our best effort at it has gone quiet. The escape is real, and the escape is narrow, and it leads us straight to the third wall, the one at the far side of the crossing. It is worth pausing on how light can push anything at all, because it is one of those facts that sounds wrong until you sit with it. Light has no mass, and yet it carries momentum, a kind of push, and when it strikes a surface and bounces off, it delivers a tiny shove. You do not feel this from a lamp or from sunlight on your skin, because the push is fantastically small, far too gentle to notice. But make the target light enough and the beam strong enough, and the arithmetic changes. A sail weighing a fraction of a gram, struck by a beam carrying the power of 100 nuclear plants, feels that tiny push multiplied into a fierce and steady acceleration. This is why the sail has to be so absurdly thin and so absurdly light, thinner than a sheet of paper, barely more than a film, because only something that light can be driven to a fifth of the speed of light by a pressure as gentle as light itself. The whole scheme lives or dies on the sail being almost nothing at all. And that thinness is also its fragility, which is part of why the idea has proven so hard. The sail must survive a beam that would vaporize almost any ordinary material, so it has to reflect nearly all of the light rather than absorbing it, because absorbing even a sliver of that power would burn it to vapor in an instant. It must stay perfectly flat and perfectly steady while being shoved from behind, because the smallest wrinkle or tilt would send it spinning off course. It must be aimed with a precision that beggars belief, a beam fired from Earth hitting a target smaller than a hand, accelerating it in the right direction to reach a star 4 light-years away, with no chance to correct the aim once it is moving. The plan was never really to send one. It was to send thousands, a swarm of tiny sails launched one after another, accepting that most would fail or drift or be lost, hoping that a handful might survive to send back a few pixels of a distant world. That is the shape of our single most serious attempt to cross a light year. Not a great ship with a crew, but a cloud of paperclip-sized chips, flung one at a time across the dark, most of them expected to be lost, a few of them perhaps carrying home a smudge of data before falling silent forever. I find something moving in that, even in its difficulty. It is the one plan that actually respects the walls we have found, the one design honest enough to shrink itself down to the only size the physics permits, and to leave its engine at home. And even so, even reduced to a gram and stripped of everything but a sail and a chip, it has proven hard enough that our best effort at it has for now gone quiet. That tells you something about the walls. They do not only defeat the big brute force dreams of enormous ships, they defeat even the cleverest, humblest, most physics-respecting plan we have ever devised, the one that gave up almost everything just to have a chance. Because we have been talking this whole time as if reaching 1/10 or 1/5 of the speed of light were the whole problem. Get up to speed, cross the light year, done. But there is a second half to every journey that we have been quietly ignoring, and it is the half that turns even a perfect crossing into something closer to heartbreak. It is not enough to reach the far side of a light year. If you actually want to arrive, to stop, to look around, to stay, you have to shed all of that speed again, and shedding it, as we are about to see, is not merely as hard as gaining it. In the cruelest possible way, it is harder. Let me show you the third wall, the problem of stopping, and let me take you to the far end of a light year to see what arriving without the ability to stop actually looks like. Everything we have calculated so far, every energy figure and every fuel ratio, has been for 1/2 of the trip. Getting up to speed, reaching 1/10 or 1/5 of the speed of light and pointing yourself at the target. But a journey is not just a departure. If you actually want to arrive somewhere, rather than merely pass through it, you have to slow back down. And here the universe plays its cruelest trick of the night, because slowing down is not a lesser problem than speeding up. It is the same problem, all over again, stacked on top of the first. Think about what stopping actually requires. Out in deep space there is nothing to push against, no air to brake in, no ground to grip. The only way to lose your speed is to throw mass out the front of the ship, just as hard as you threw it out the back to get moving. To cancel 1/10 of the speed of light, you have to produce another 1/10 of the speed of light's worth of push, in the opposite direction. In the language of rocketry, you have to spend the same enormous change in velocity a second time, and because the rocket equation is exponential, spending that velocity change twice does not double the fuel you need. It squares it. Let me put real numbers to that, because the squaring is where it becomes savage. Remember the fusion rocket, the one design where the arithmetic finally became livable, needing about 10 kilograms of fuel for every kilogram of payload to reach 1/10 of light speed. That was for acceleration only, for a one-way sprint that never slows down. Now ask that same fusion rocket to also stop at the far end. The mass ratio does not go from 10 to 20. It goes from 10 to roughly 100. 100 kilograms of fuel for every kilogram of payload, just to arrive rather than to fly past. And the chemical rocket, which was already impossible by thousands of orders of magnitude, becomes impossible squared, a phrase that barely means anything because the first impossibility was already complete. Stopping, in other words, is not the second half of the problem. It is a whole new copy of the entire problem, multiplied into the first. This is why nearly every serious interstellar concept ever designed, from the fusion ships to the laser sails, quietly gives up on stopping. They are not designed to arrive, they are designed to fly through. They accept from the start that the probe will cross its target at a fifth or a tenth of the speed of light, and simply keep going, gathering whatever data it can in the brief window when the destination flashes past. And I want you to sit inside that window for a moment, because it is one of the strangest and most quietly devastating consequences of everything we have discussed, and it deserves to be felt rather than just noted. Picture the probe arriving. It has flown for a very long time. Let us not even argue about how long, whether it is the 20 years of a laser sail crossing 4 light years or something far greater. Simply that it has flown across the whole width of a light year and beyond, and now the star it was sent to study is finally ahead of it, growing brighter, and around that star a world. This is the moment the entire mission was built for, and the probe cannot stop. It is moving at tens of thousands of kilometers per second, and so the destination it crossed a light year to reach does not slowly resolve and hold still before it. It rushes up, blooms across the field of view, and is gone. The whole encounter, the entire arrival, the payoff of the longest journey ever undertaken, lasts a matter of hours. The probe takes what measurements it can as the world blurs past, and then the star is behind it, shrinking, and ahead is only more dark. It came all that way to spend an afternoon, and then imagine the other end of that signal, the part that breaks something in you if you let it. The data the probe gathers in those few hours has to travel back across the light years to the people who sent it, at the speed of a light taking years to arrive. But the people who sent it are not waiting by the receiver. They cannot be. So much time has passed during the crossing that the mission's builders are long dead, their names half forgotten, the institution that launched the probe perhaps gone entirely. The very language they spoke drifted into something their descendants would struggle to read. The signal comes home to a world that has moved on, carrying a few hours of measurements of a place no living human remembers deciding to visit. There is no control room full of cheering faces. There is only a faint transmission arriving out of the dark, addressed to people who no longer exist, reporting on an afternoon spent crossing a world that the probe could never stop to touch. That is what arriving looks like, when you cannot stop. It is not triumph. It is a message in a bottle thrown so far ahead in time that the sender is gone before it lands. And it is the third wall, the one waiting at the far end of every crossing, the one that turns even a flawless journey into a kind of tender heartbreak. The first wall was the energy, thousands of bombs for a single probe. The second wall was the rocket equation, the fuel tank heavier than the universe. And the third wall is this, that even if you beat the first two, even if you somehow reach a tenth of the speed of light and cross your light year, you arrive unable to stay, and you report home to no one. Let me make the arithmetic of stopping as plain as I can, because the squaring is easy to state and easy to underestimate. Speeding up to a tenth of light speed requires an enormous change in velocity. Slowing back down to a stop requires exactly the same enormous change again in the other direction. In an ordinary journey on Earth, this is nothing, because you can brake against the road or the air for free. In space, there is nothing to brake against, so you have to carry the means to slow down, which means carrying more fuel, which means, back in the exponential world of the rocket equation, multiplying the whole impossible tower by itself. If reaching the speed needed 10 units of fuel for every unit of payload, arriving needs not 20 but 100. The trip out and the trip to a stop are not added together, they are multiplied, and multiplication in the exponential regime is how a merely enormous number becomes an impossible one. This is why the honest interstellar designs almost all quietly decide from the very first page that they will not stop. They accept the flyby, and I want to sit inside that decision for a moment longer, because it reshapes what the whole endeavour even means. When we imagine reaching another star, we picture arrival. We picture the probe settling into orbit, cameras turning, a patient study of a new world unfolding over years. The flyby erases all of that. The probe does not settle into anything. It crosses the entire target system, star and worlds and everything, in a matter of hours, because at a tenth or a fifth of light speed a whole solar system is only hours wide. Everything the mission was for, every measurement it crossed unimaginable distances to make, has to happen in that brief window as the destination blurs past and is gone. And then the probe sails on into the dark on the far side, its work already finished, carrying its handful of data away from the very place it came to see. There is a particular loneliness in the message that comes home from such a mission, and it is worth naming fully. The data has to cross the light years back to us at the speed of light, taking as many years to return as the light year is wide, and by then the sending has aged past a single lifetime. So the signal arrives to a world that has turned over. The engineers who aimed the probe are gone. The room where the mission was planned may not exist. The words in which the mission was described have drifted the way all language drifts across centuries. And into that changed world falls a faint transmission out of the dark, carrying a few hours of measurements of a place almost no one still living chose to visit, addressed, in effect, to the dead. It is the truest message in a bottle we could ever throw, thrown so far ahead in time that the thrower is always gone before it lands. That is what it means to cross a light year with a machine that cannot stop. Even the triumph arrives as an inheritance, handed to descendants who did not send it. At this point, someone who knows a little physics will raise a hand, because there is one more hope, one card we have not yet played, and it is a real one. Everything I have said about the time a crossing takes has been measured by our clocks, the clocks back home. But the universe has a genuine strangeness built into it, discovered by Einstein, that seems tailor-made for exactly this problem. When you move very fast, time itself slows down for you. The faster you go, the slower your own clock runs compared to the ones you left behind. And so perhaps, the hope goes, the traveller does not experience the long years at all. Perhaps at these tremendous speeds the journey across a light year compresses, for the person making it, into something short and survivable. Perhaps relativity is the secret door in the wall. It is a beautiful thought, and it is the last hope standing. So let us test it honestly, and see whether time dilation is the escape it appears to be, or whether it too is locked behind a door we have already found we cannot open. Einstein gave us one of the strangest true facts about reality, and at first glance it looks like the perfect answer to everything we have been struggling with tonight. Time is not the same for everyone. When you move very fast relative to someone else, your clock runs slow compared to theirs. Not because your watch is broken, but because time itself, the real thing, flows more slowly for a fast-moving traveller. This is not a theory waiting to be confirmed. We measure it every day. The satellites that run the navigation in your phone have to correct for it constantly, because their clocks, moving fast in orbit, drift out of step with the clocks on the ground. Motion genuinely slows time, so the hope is natural and immediate. If a traveller moved fast enough toward another star, perhaps the long years of the crossing would shrink for them into something short. Perhaps relativity is the secret passage through the wall, and in the extreme, this hope is real. If you could travel at 99% of the speed of light, or better still 99.9, the effect becomes powerful. Time for the traveller would slow so dramatically that a journey our clocks measure in years could pass, for the person aboard, in months or weeks. At speeds close enough to light, you could in principle cross not just a light year, but the whole galaxy within a single human lifetime, as felt from inside the ship, while thousands of years poured by back home, so the door is genuinely there. The problem, as always tonight, is what it takes to reach it. Because here is the part the hopeful version leaves out. The slowing of time only becomes significant when you get genuinely close to the speed of light, up in the region of 90% and beyond. At the speeds we have actually been discussing, the speeds that were already impossibly expensive, the effect is almost nothing. At a tenth of the speed of light, the speed that cost us 7,000 bombs for a single probe, a traveller's clock runs slow by only about half of 1%. Half a percent. That 10-year crossing of a light year would feel, to the person making it, like 9 years and about 11 months. The relativistic discount at a tenth of light speed is a couple of weeks off a decade. It is a rounding error. It saves you nothing that matters. So to make time dilation actually help, to get the real compression, you cannot travel at a tenth of the speed of light. You have to travel at something like 99% of it. And now you see the trap close, because we already know what it costs to approach the speed of light, and the closer you get, the worse it becomes, not linearly, but explosively. Remember the first wall, the energy of motion, which grows with the square of speed. That was already true at low speeds. But as you approach the speed of light itself, the energy stops merely squaring and begins to climb toward infinity. To reach a tenth of light speed cost thousands of bombs. To reach 99% would cost not a few times more, but hundreds of times more. And to inch from 99% toward the speed of light, the energy required runs away toward numbers with no ceiling at all. The universe charges an ever steeper price for every fraction closer to light you try to come, and the price approaches the infinite exactly as the reward, the time compression becomes real. Do you see what has happened? The shortcut is locked with the very same key as everything else. Time dilation could save the traveller, but only at speeds so close to light that the energy wall, the first wall, rises up to block the way, higher and more absolute than ever. Relativity does not offer us a way around the energy problem. It offers us a reward that only unlocks after we have already solved the energy problem, and solved it far more completely than we could ever solve it for a tenth of light speed. The secret passage leads back to the same locked door we have been standing in front of all night. Every escape we have tried, the faster engine, the fuel left at home, and now the slowing of time itself, has turned out to route back to that single barrier, the cost of speed, written in energy. And there is one more thing that time dilation does not change, which quietly matters. Even if a traveller could ride close to light speed and feel the years compress, the universe back home still experiences the full journey. A light year still takes more than a year to cross by the clocks of everyone who stayed behind, because nothing, not even the traveller, can cross it faster than light, and light takes a year. The person aboard might feel less time pass, but the world they left, the people waiting, the civilization that sent them, still lives through the whole long span and more. Time dilation is a gift to the traveller if the traveller could ever afford the speed. It is no gift at all to the ones who wait, and it does nothing to shorten the true crossing measured against the ruler of the stars. Light still does it in a year, we still cannot. So now we have seen all of it. The 3 walls and the 1 false shortcut. The energy, measured in thousands of bombs for a single small probe. The rocket equation, which makes the fuel tank heavier than the universe unless you leave the fuel at home, and leaving the fuel at home shrinks your ship to a paperclip that cannot stop. The problem of stopping, which squares the whole impossible sum and turns even success into an afternoon flyby reporting home to no one. And time dilation, the last hope, which only pays out at speeds the energy wall forbids. 4 attempts to cross a light year in a human span of years, and every one of them defeated by the same underlying fact: the ferocious, unnegotiable cost of moving fast through a universe whose speed limit is a year per tick. The clearest way to feel this is the old thought experiment of the twins. Imagine 2 twins, and one of them boards a ship and travels very close to the speed of light to a distant star and back, while the other stays home. When the traveller returns, they are genuinely younger than the twin who stayed, because their clock ran slow the whole way. This is not a paradox and not a trick. It is a real feature of the universe, and if we could build such a ship, it would truly work. A traveller moving close enough to light could cross distances that take centuries by the clocks at home, and feel only a few years pass. But look at the condition buried in that sentence, the words close enough to light. The whole gift depends on reaching a speed just a hair below the universal limit, and reaching that speed is precisely the thing the energy wall forbids most absolutely of all. Because the energy needed does not just keep rising as you approach the speed of light, it runs away toward infinity. To reach half of light speed is expensive. To reach 9/10 is far more than twice as expensive. To reach 99% is more expensive still, and to close the last slivers toward the speed of light the required energy climbs, without any ceiling at all, demanding, in the limit, an infinite amount to actually touch the speed of light. So the traveller's time-compressing gift sits locked behind a price that grows toward the infinite, exactly as the gift becomes worth having. At the speeds we could conceivably reach, the gift is almost nothing. At the speeds where the gift is real, the price is beyond everything. The secret passage and the locked door are the same door. Relativity did not give us a way around the wall. It gave us a beautiful reward and hid it behind the highest part of the very wall we were trying to escape. It would be easy to end there, in the shadow of the walls, and call the light year simply impossible. But that would not be honest, and it would not be the whole truth, because there is a difference between what we cannot do with the machines we have and what the laws of physics forbid forever. Some of what we have seen tonight is a wall in the deepest sense, fixed by the speed of light and the structure of energy, unlikely ever to move. But some of it is merely current, a limit of our engineering and our resources rather than of reality itself. And there are ideas, real ones, sitting in design studies and physics papers that reach toward the far side of these walls. Before I give you the final answer to the question we started with, I owe you an honest look at those ideas, at the ladder of things that might someday change this story. So let us ask the last question directly. Is 1 light year a wall, or is it a frontier? Let me be fair to hope, because hope has done real work in this field, and the people who have spent their lives designing ways across the dark deserve an honest hearing. There is a ladder of ideas that reach toward the far side of the walls we have found, and each rung buys something genuine. None of them, as we'll see, quite gets us there. But together they mark the line between what is merely beyond our current reach and what may be forbidden forever, and that line is exactly what we need to answer our last question. The first serious rung is fusion, and we have already met its edge. Back in the 1970s, a group of British engineers spent years designing a real interstellar probe called Daedalus, a machine that would fuse pellets of hydrogen and helium and ride the exhaust up to around 12% of the speed of light. At that speed, 1 light year takes only about 8 years. This is not fantasy physics. Every step of it obeys laws we understand. The trouble is the scale. Daedalus would have weighed something like 54,000 tons, most of it fuel, including a rare form of helium that barely exists on Earth and would have to be mined from the atmosphere of a giant planet. And even then, it was designed only to fly past its target, never to stop. Fusion is real, and fusion could in principle cross a light year in under a decade. But the machine that does it is a flying mountain of fuel we do not yet know how to build or supply. It is a frontier, not a wall. But it is a frontier we are nowhere near reaching. The next rung climbs higher, into the most concentrated fuel that physics permits at all, antimatter. When ordinary matter meets its mirror twin, the two annihilate completely, converting their entire mass into energy with efficiency nothing else approaches. A single kilogram of antimatter carries an amount of energy that dwarfs anything chemical or even nuclear. In principle, a few kilograms of it could drive a probe to a serious fraction of the speed of light. It is the perfect fuel, exactly what the rocket equation was begging for. And here is the catch, and it is a wall dressed as a frontier. We can make antimatter, but only a few atoms at a time, in enormous particle accelerators, at fabulous cost. In all the years we have been producing it, humanity has made only a tiny fraction of a single gram, measured in billionths. To gather the kilograms an interstellar probe would need, at anything like current rates, would take not centuries but something on the order of 1,000,000 billion years, longer than the universe has existed many times over. And even if we had it, we do not know how to store it, because it destroys any ordinary container it touches. Antimatter is the perfect fuel we can neither make in useful amounts nor keep. The energy is there. The reaching of it is not. Then there are the sails, which we have already met in their most serious form, the laser-pushed paperclip. They deserve their place on the ladder because they are the one idea that truly sidesteps the rocket equation, and variations on them, larger sails pushed by the sun's own light, or by great banks of lasers, remain among the most plausible things anyone has proposed. But every version runs into the same far wall we found before. Pushing from behind can get you up to speed. Nothing reaches ahead to slow you down. People have sketched clever answers, a sail that opens into a magnetic parachute to drag against the thin gas between the stars, or one that turns to brake against the light of the destination star as it approaches. These are ingenious, and none of them has ever been built or tested, and all of them remain for now marks on paper. The sail is a real frontier for reaching speed. Stopping is still a wall. There is one more rung worth naming, because it is beautiful, and because its failure is instructive. In the 1960s, the physicist Robert Bussard imagined a ship that would carry no fuel at all, but would instead scoop up the thin hydrogen drifting between the stars as it flew, funneling that gas into a fusion engine and burning it on the way. An engine that feeds on the emptiness it crosses, needing no tank, able to run forever. It is one of the loveliest ideas in the history of the subject. And when later physicists worked the numbers carefully, they found something deflating. The scoop needed to gather that impossibly thin gas would have to be enormous, and dragging it through even the near vacuum between the stars would slow the ship more than the collected fuel could speed it up. The interstellar ramjet, studied honestly, turns out to work better as a brake than as an engine. It is a reminder that not every beautiful idea survives contact with the arithmetic, and that the walls we have found are not for lack of imagination, and at the very top of the ladder sits the dream that would not merely climb the walls but erase them, warp. In 1994, a physicist named Miguel Alcubierre showed that Einstein's own equations permit, on paper, a way to move faster than light without ever locally breaking the speed limit. The trick is to leave the ship sitting still inside a bubble of space, and to move the bubble, contracting space ahead of it, and expanding space behind so that the destination is carried toward you rather than crossed. It is genuinely allowed by the mathematics of general relativity, and it requires something we have never seen and may never find, a form of matter with negative energy, exotic matter, in quantities that early estimates put at more than the mass energy of an entire planet, perhaps of a star. Recent work has chipped away at that requirement, bringing the numbers down, sketching gentler versions that stay below light speed, but not one of them has removed the need for a kind of matter no experiment has ever produced. Warp is the one idea that could make a light year trivial. It is also the one that leans hardest on physics we have never once observed, and that may turn out to be forbidden entirely. It is the farthest frontier, or it is the highest wall, and honestly tonight no one knows which. So that is the ladder, honestly climbed. Fusion, real but requiring a mountain of fuel we cannot yet build. Antimatter, perfect but unmakeable and unstorable. Sails, able to reach speed but not to stop. The ramjet, beautiful and backward. And warp, transcendent and possibly impossible. Every rung buys something, and every rung fails at something, and the pattern in their failures is the answer to our question. Is one light year a wall or a frontier? It is both, depending on which method you hold it against. Against everything we can actually build today, it is a wall, complete and unmoving. Against everything we can seriously dream, it is a frontier, distant and guarded, possibly reachable in some far century, possibly never. Every buildable method says wall, every dreamable method says maybe. And there is one being, one traveller, for whom the light year is no wall at all, and it has been with us the entire night, quietly, since the very beginning. Come back with me to that seed I planted long ago, the smaller symmetry I asked you to hold. We cannot send ourselves across a light year in less than thousands of years, but we can already send light. And so let me show you the one thing of ours that has actually made the crossing. Somewhere out in the dark tonight, a wave of radio is travelling, a broadcast that left Earth long ago, carrying a voice, a song, a fragment of some ordinary day. It moves at the full speed of light, because it is light, and it does not slow, and it does not tire. 1 year after it left our planet in perfect silence, it slipped past the 1 light-year mark, the very line that no ship of ours has ever come near, the wall that has defeated every engine and every dream. It crossed the tick without effort, because it is the thing the unit was built to measure, and it is still going, out past where any probe will travel for 10,000 years, carrying us outward at the only speed that beats the dark. We're already out there, just not as ourselves. We're out there as light. I want to draw out the pattern in these 5 rungs, because the pattern itself is the honest answer to whether a light year is a wall or a frontier. Look at what each one asks of us. Fusion asks for a mountain of rare fuel and a machine we do not know how to build. Antimatter asks for kilograms of a substance we can make only in invisible traces and cannot store. Sails ask us to give up the ability to stop. The ramjet asks for a scoop that turns out to break more than it drives. And warp asks for a kind of matter that may not exist anywhere in the universe. Not one of them asks for something we simply have not gotten around to yet, the way flight or the moon once waited on effort. Each asks for something that is either enormously beyond our reach or possibly forbidden outright. That is the signature of a real barrier rather than a temporary one. When every path forward requires either a fuel we cannot obtain, a sacrifice of the goal itself, or physics we have never seen, you are not looking at a hard engineering problem. You are looking at the edge of what is allowed. And this is where the honest answer refuses to be simple, because it is genuinely 2 answers held together. If you ask whether we could cross a light year with anything we can build in the next century, the answer is a flat and unmoving no, a wall in the deepest sense. But if you ask whether the laws of physics forbid it forever, the answer is softer and stranger, a maybe that leans on fusion mountains and antimatter traces and exotic matter that might not be real. The light year is a wall to our hands and a frontier to our equations, and the space between those 2 answers is exactly the space in which every dream of reaching the stars lives, suspended, neither granted nor entirely denied. But there is that one traveller for whom the whole question dissolves, and I promise to bring you back to it. Follow for a moment a single wave of radio leaving the Earth. It is a broadcast from a long time ago, an ordinary transmission carrying ordinary human sound, and the instant it left our antennas it began moving outward at the full speed of light, because it is light. It does not slow, it does not tire, It pays no energy cost because it was never anything but light to begin with. 1 year after it left the Earth, in complete silence, with no engine and no fuel and no crew, that wave slipped past the 1 light-year mark. It crossed the exact line that has defeated every rocket and every sail and every dream in this entire night, and it crossed it as easily as breathing in 1 year, because that line was drawn to measure precisely the thing it is, and it is still going, out past the reach of any probe we will build for 10,000 years, carrying the sound of some forgotten afternoon deeper into the dark than we will ever personally travel. We're already out there, only as light, only as a wave, but out there, past the wall, ahead of ourselves, waving. That is the truth I most want to leave you holding as we turn toward the end. We are a species that can throw its voice across a light year in a single year, and cannot throw a single gram of its body across in less than 100 lifetimes. We can reach across the gap. We simply cannot follow our own reach. Every night our signals pour outward at the speed the unit is named for, crossing tick after tick of the cosmic ruler, and we stay behind, held in place by the walls we have spent this whole night learning. We can wave across the dark, we cannot walk into it, not yet, and perhaps not ever. And with that held gently in your mind, we are finally ready for the answer. So let me tell you, plainly and at last, how long it truly takes to travel 1 light year. We began with a question that sounded almost simple. How long does it take to travel 1 light year? Not to another star, not across the galaxy, just 1 tick of the ruler, the smallest unit on the cosmic map. And now, having walked the whole distance together, we can finally answer it plainly. But the answer is not a single number, because the truth is that it depends entirely on what you are willing to send and what you are willing to lose. If you send light, the answer is 1 year. That is the definition, clean and perfect. If you send a radio whisper of your own voice, 1 year, and it is already done, already out there, already past the mark. But if you want to send something of substance, a machine, an instrument, a body, anything that could actually arrive and look around and tell you what it found, then the answer changes completely, and it changes in a way that our intuitions are simply not built to hold. With the fastest object we have ever built, and even then only for a falling instant, about 15 centuries. With the farthest machine we have ever flown, given the steady endurance of Voyager, about 18,000 years for that 1 tick. And with any craft we could actually build to carry real instruments, and more than that to slow down and stay, the honest answer is not a number of years at all. Here is the plainest way I can say it, the thing this whole night has been walking toward. The time it takes to travel 1 light year, by any means we can actually build, is longer than the life of anyone who could launch it. That is the real answer. Not a figure you could write on a calendar, but a fact about generations. To send anything of ourselves across a single tick of the cosmic ruler is to send it to our descendants, or to no one. The person who begins the journey cannot be the person who ends it. The one who lights the engine has already accepted in the lighting of it that they will not see the arrival, that their children will not, that the crossing will outlast not just a life, but a civilization's memory of why it was begun. Ask how long it takes to travel 1 light year, and the truest answer is not measured in years. It is measured in lifetimes we do not yet know how to count. It takes, for all practical purposes, forever. That is why the time it takes to travel 1 light year is worse than you think. Not because the number is large, though it is. It is worse than you think because the number is longer than us. It is longer than the person who asked the question, longer than the ones who would build the ship, longer than the language they would write the mission in. We reach for the smallest unit on the map, expecting it to be the easy one, the baseline, the first small step, and we found that even the first small step is longer than a human story. That single tick, the one we called only, the one we flick past when we say the nearest star is only 4 light years away, is a wall. And now, I hope, when you hear that word only, you will feel the whole weight that hides inside it. Let me gather the phrase that has carried us all the way here, the plainest line in the topic, and let me finish it properly. Light does it in a year. We do it in forever. That is the entire distance of tonight, held in 2 short sentences. The unit of the universe is named for the fastest thing that exists, and that fastest thing crosses 1 tick in a year, and we, with all our engines and all our fire and all our dreaming, cross it in something that has no honest end. The gap between light and us is not a gap of degree that a better century will close. It is the difference between the thing the ruler was built to measure and the creatures who drew the ruler and cannot walk it. And yet I do not want to leave you in the cold, because there is something else in this, something that has been quietly present all night, and that I find, the longer I sit with it, more consoling than sad. We cannot cross the light year with our bodies, but we noticed it, we measured it. We are the part of the universe that looked at the smallest tick on the map and worked out, to the kilometre and to the joule, exactly why it is beyond us. No radio wave knows the distance it crosses. No star counts the light years between itself and the next. Only we do that. We are the small, slow, earthbound thing that cannot make the crossing, and we are also the only thing in all that dark that understands the crossing well enough to grieve it. That is not nothing. That may, in its own way, be the most remarkable fact of the night. And we are already out there, in the only way we can be. Every broadcast we have ever sent is still travelling, still crossing tick after tick of the ruler at the one speed that beats the dark. We can wave across the dark, we cannot walk into it. But the wave is real, and it is ours, and it is moving outward tonight past marks no ship of ours will reach for 10,000 years, carrying the sound of an ordinary human day into a distance we will never personally cross. There is a kind of tenderness in that, a species that can only wave, waving anyway, throwing its voice as far as light will carry it, because that is the one part of us that the walls cannot stop. So the next time you're outside on a clear night, and you find the nearest star, and some quiet corner of your mind offers up that familiar phrase, only 4 light years away, I hope you will pause on it now. I hope you will feel the true size of that only. Behind it stands one tick of the ruler, one single light year, a distance that light crosses in a year, and that we cannot cross at all in any span a human heart can hold. 4 of those tick marks to the nearest star, 100,000 of them across our galaxy, 2.5 million to the next, and us, down here, at the bottom of the first one, our farthest machine not yet finished with its first day, our voices already gone on ahead of us into the dark, faster than we will ever follow. Think about what that really asks of anyone who would try. To launch a ship toward even the nearest star is to begin something you have already agreed not to finish. The person who lights the engine will be long gone before it arrives. Their children will be gone. The whole world that decided to send it will have changed past recognition, and may not remember or care why the thing was ever launched. Every other journey in human history, however hard, however dangerous, held out the possibility of return, or at least of arrival within a life. This one does not. To cross a light year is to hand the arriving to people who do not yet exist, and to trust them to receive something you began and will never see completed. That is a different kind of act than any voyage we have ever undertaken. It is closer to planting a tree whose shade you will never sit in, except that the tree is a starship, and the shade is a signal that will not come home for longer than your civilization may last. And this is the final turn of the phrase we have carried all night, so let me set it down complete. Light does it in a year. We do it in forever. Not forever as in a very long time, but forever as in longer than the one who asks, longer than the one who builds, longer than the memory of why. When you ask how long it takes to travel 1 light year, that is the honest answer. It takes longer than us. It takes, for any of our hands can build, forever. That is why the true answer is worse than you might have guessed at the start of the night, and also, I think, stranger and quieter and more beautiful than merely bad news. We are small and slow beneath a sky whose smallest marking we cannot cross, and we are the only thing under that sky that worked out exactly why. So hold, one last time, the image of the single tick. 1 light year. The distance light crosses in a year, and we cross in something with no end. 4 of those ticks to the nearest star. 100,000 of them across our own galaxy. 2.5 million to the next galaxy over. The faint smudge you can find on a dark night if you know where to look. And all of it drawn in a unit whose first, smallest mark is a wall to everything we can build. We did not fail to cross it for lack of trying, or lack of nerve, or lack of dreaming. We cannot cross it because the universe is built the way it is built, because light is as fast as anything can be, and because a year of light is farther than a lifetime of fire can carry us. The universe measured itself in years of light, and set the first mark beyond our reach. That is not a wall built to keep us out. It is simply the true shape of the room we were born into, the honest scale of the distances between things. And there is a strange comfort in knowing the real shape of the room, even when the room is larger than any journey we can make. We know how far 1 light year is now. We know exactly what it would cost, in fire and in fuel and in generations, and we know why the cost cannot yet be paid. That knowledge does not carry us across. But it settles something. It puts us in our true place, small and slow beneath a sky drawn in a unit we cannot travel, and it lets us rest there, looking up, understanding at last the full and quiet weight of a single tick of the ruler, and how very far light goes in the year it takes the earth to turn once around the sun.